Good evening, everyone. My name is Selena, and I am from the ICO. I work at the ICO, the Independent Cinema Office. Welcome, everyone, to our event this evening. For those of you who don't know the ICO, we're the UK's national body in support of independent cinema of all forms. And if you want to find out more about the ICO, please go to our website, www.independentcinemaoffice.org.uk. Welcome to our very exciting launch event for the Cinema of Ideas, which is the ICO's innovative new online platform for amplifying different stories through collaboration, discussion, and film. The Cinema of Ideas will host a series of online events that will run over the next year into 2022 and beyond, bringing underappreciated strands of film culture and heritage directly to audiences to create a welcoming public forum for vibrant critical discussion on the everyday engagement and experiences of film, ideas, and audiences. And if you want to find out more about the Cinema of Ideas, there's a dedicated website, www.cinemaafideas.org.uk, and you can find out more through the ICO social media and newsletters, etc. I also wanted to say collaboration is central to our programming for this project. And in the next couple of months, there'll be an open call to fund 2 curatorial voices and/or collectives from underrepresented groups to program films and discussion events as part of the Cinema of Ideas. I'd also like to thank our partner cinemas who are collaborating with us on this endeavour, and our funders at the BFI who have been awarded funds from the National Lottery. So just a few housekeeping events before I introduce this evening. This event is being live captioned, and these should appear at the bottom of your screen, but you can also click the link in the chat to access a fully adjustable page for the captions. If you have any questions throughout the session to any of our speakers, please write them in the chat and we'll feed them through as the discussion takes place. We're not going to wait to the end. So please, if you've got any comments, thoughts, reflections, excitable things to say, please just send them through and we'll feed those through to our speakers. The session's being recorded and it will be available to watch on our video platform, as well as Elmina's film, Rising Women of Rastafari, until 11:59 p.m. on Thursday, the 2nd of September. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Aleema Gray, who is Community History Curator at the Museum of London and a PhD researcher at Warwick University. Her research is funded by the Yesu Persaud Centre for Caribbean Studies and uncovers a community-engaged history of the Rastafari movement in England. And we're really honoured to have Aleema curate our event this evening, Archival Resistance, Rastafari Women in Britain. We previously worked with Aleema on our 2020 National Film Tour Second Sight, which in association with Lux was a project that explored the legacy, methods and aesthetic strategies and histories of the UK Black Film Workshop movement. And Elmina Davis was very much at its centre. And we're really delighted to be continuing our collaboration with Aleema today. I should also say that Aleema's written a brilliant blog, Reflections on Omega Rising and the Rastafari Archive, which offers a rich context to her research and our discussion this evening. And you can find the blog on the Cinema of Ideas and ICO websites. So that's it. I'm just going to hand over to Aleema. Thank you, Aleema.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I think the screen should be shared with my presentation. Yeah, there we go. So thank you very much, and greetings to everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to have curated this conversation, which has particularly been inspired by a lot of my research on, or should I say with, the Rastafari community in Britain. A lot of my thinking around archival resistance and Rastafari women is particularly coming from this lived element of the archive, both as an institution, but also as a process. But it is also coming from a place of centering an ethics of care within the work that I do as a curator, as a researcher, And particularly as someone who was raised within the Rastafari tradition, I've been particularly inspired by bridging the gap between how we see ourselves and how others sees us. In fact, the picture that you can see here is actually of my mom in the 1980s. So yeah, it's very much coming from a place of the living element. So I'm constantly questioning, what does it mean to know and represent within the context of my work, and what does redistributive knowledge looks like within the context of my practice and my work, and how can we develop a type of practice that centers those who have been silenced and erased from history. So I'm hoping and I'm interested in thinking through some of these entanglements today. And hopefully it might be the start of a much needed wider conversation on power and voice and visibility. So as Selena said, feel free to put your questions and comments throughout. The panel helping me today is also wonderful women who can speak to this lived realm of practice, of community, of knowledge. But before introducing them, I think it's important to situate this work. And of course, we must first begin with acknowledging the work of Elmina Davis, otherwise known as Sister D. You can flip to the next slide. I first came across Sister D's film many years ago, before I had any idea that I would go on to, writing a history of the Rastafari in Britain. I remember watching it as a young lioness and listening to the voices of the sisters saying, a woman doesn't just dread. When a woman puts on her dreadlocks, it is in defiance to what has been ordained as beautiful, as upright, as clean. And so the film for me gives us a chance to listen to the interior histories and the lives of Rastafari women between Britain and the Caribbean. Amiga kind of takes inspiration from Alpha and Amiga, which can be seen as Rastafari's own kind of gender identity, which is predicated on balance, this balance between the feminine and the masculine. But rather than putting forward definitions of what it means to be a Rasta, Sister D shows us how these women are actually connected within a godly realm through a common thread, also known as liberty, which I guess is this essence of being, this essence of saying, we are who we are, and we can never be what you want us to be. Next slide. But to document a film centering Rastafari women during a period of racial and fraught tensions itself was a very radical act. By the 1980s, film had been weaponized as an important part of the Black liberation struggle. Indeed, it was during this time that you see the emergence of a number of Black film collectives, Black Audio Film Collective, Sankofa Film, and Audio Collective, Chedo Film, which was at the heart of this movement. But for me as well, it was this history, the St. Paul's Uprising, the New Cross Fire, the uprisings in Brixton and Tottenham, which provided this understanding of the past according to the present. Their work was almost representing an engagement with the history of erasure, of colonial violence, of trauma. And it was clear that for many of us, they arrived to a point where we couldn't trust history. So given its capacity to visually and audibly collect and reinterpret information that had once been exclusively held within the state archives or within the media, both the film and the filmmaker began almost occupying this position of creating spaces of empowerment and counter narratives that could move beyond the hegemony of the state. As one member said, in recasting the binary of myth and history, of imagination and experiential states of occasional violence. Next slide. Situated within this radical tradition, Sister D began using the film to spread the liberty of Rastafari women. She arrived from St. Vincent in her youth and soon became part of Chedo Film Collective, one of the founder members. Like many of the members, Sister D was self-taught and gleaned much of her experiences from working on the People's Account. The responses to the RAF demonstrated the possibilities of documentary film and perhaps inspired some of her ideas on the film Amiga Rising. So the work for me is very much ahead of its time. Sister D moved beyond the Rastafari as this cultural phenomenon. She combines spiritualism, archival material with oral traditions to very much, go beyond this idea of Rastafari as, reggae heads are iconic weed smokers, which for me has very much sanitized the intellectualism, their liberatory vision, and their commitment to practice. But when I was watching the film, I felt like it could only be a Rasta woman who could handle their stories, their joys, their pains, their tribulations with such care. As someone that has access to this lived realm, I felt like the film was very much an archive, a personal documentation into my own stories through the generation. It became clear to me that she was actually engaging in a deeper process of confronting the underlying structures of the archive. Who does it belong to? And the narratives that it represents, but also engaging in memory and remembering. But this act of remembering for those whose histories have been subjected to colonial violence and erasure is always political. So I started, you could put the next slide on. I started this process of thinking about the moving, the visual archives of Rastafari women. What can we do with them? What do they tell us that perhaps the scholarly works cannot? What do we remember? I started thinking about, for instance, this picture here, taken as part of the Handsworth Self-Portrait Project in 1978 by Derek Bishton and Brian Homer. And when I look at this photograph, it reveals very much the jovial spaces of Black sociability in Handsworth. And unlike many of the archival images documenting sound systems and confrontations with the police, this image here for me kind of underscores the less idealized spheres of Rastafari life, community, friendship, play. Standing at the forefront of the photographs are Rastafari girls dressed in what was seen as, modern Rastafari attire, the long skirts, the tights, the head ties. Their male counterparts appear to be shuffled behind them, which suggests these less prevailing interpretations of Rastafari gendered identity, where women were rarely seen. These girls were, as the image suggests, reclaiming their position to be seen and to be in the frame. And for me, looking at this image, I was left to speculate, how were these young girls come to conceive of themselves as a Rasta at such a tender age? One of them in the pictures was actually 12 years old. What were the relationship with their white peers at school? What sense of community did Rastafari offer them that practices could not? So I started thinking about some of the oral histories that I'd collected as part of my research. Started thinking about the significance of place, of space, what makes Britain different to, for instance, Jamaica. I also started thinking about, you could go to the next slide, to a reasoning that I had with Sister Yvonne, also known as Mama Ascali, and she told me that a Rasta woman in the UK, your hurdles were higher than other Black women. You not only had issues with the outside world, you had it with your race, within your race, because of the colonized way of thinking was embedded in us. I was strengthened by the fact that I felt that I was being true to myself, but also I was striking a blow for my women ancestors who were forced to be a certain type of way. Part of the freedom that we had as a young Rasta woman was the fact that we could be true to ourselves in our militant and African clothes, rather than being true to what society's expectations of us was. So from listening to the lived experiences of Rastafari women, I was kind of opened up to this body of moving archives. And I say archives because Rastas are very suspicious of who they allow into their archives. Their stories, their documents, represent these kind of private archives that's contained in their bodies. I say moving because I guess there's this idea of the archive as this exclusive, stagnant, static institution, one that creates and contains categories of knowledge. At the same time, that process of archiving, of documenting knowledge, has always seemed to be in the hands of the select few and those with the resources to do so. And so for me, what happens when ordinary people assume access to the archive and assume the role as the archiver? So I'll stop it there because I'm also conscious of time. And I also need to introduce the panelists today, Rashida Shanti Malcolm and Ju Giovanni. Rashida is a journalist, an author, a playwright with a passion for empowering women and girls. But also, unbeknownst to many, she was also featured in Omega Rising, the documentary. So definitely a familiar face. And we're also joined with June Giovanni, who is a London-based film curator, archivist, international consultant in African and African diaspora cinema for more than 35 years. She is the director of June Giovanni Pan-African Film Archive. Among many other things, she set up and ran the BFI's African and Caribbean Film Unit and created the Black Film Bulletin with Galen Gold, programmed Planet Africa at Toronto International Film Festival, and is known for her knowledge and experience in the film of Pan-African cinema generally. I'll start, I guess, with some questions, and then I'll open it up to those of you in the event. But I guess I'll start with you, Rashida, because you were in the film. It would be good to get some of your reflections on, I guess, the significance of Omega Rising and what it felt like for you to be a part of that project.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Aleema, for having me on board here. And oh, wow, those footage of Sister D, they just brought back, you know, some real emotional memories for me. And seeing her as she was, yeah, quite emotional there. But okay, so sorry, I got caught up in that. What did you say?
That's okay. It happens. I mean, I didn't know Sister D, but it does happen to me as well. I guess just generally a reflection on the significance of Sister D's film, but also I guess for you as someone who was featured in the film quite heavily, what did it feel to be a part of that project at the time?
Well, at the time, it was huge for us. It was wonderful that, you know, our filmmaker Sis was going to make the first Rasta women film, you know, about Rasta women in the UK. It was, we were excited, but we were also aware that there was a lot of condemnation, a lot of people criticizing her, and she was very aware of it. But still, you know, she in true soldier warrior style, Sister D just, you know, continued doing what she knew she had to do. She just, you know, she was just led by the spirit and led by her love of Rastafari, of the culture, that more than anything else. And you know, that's one of the things I loved about her when she said, you know, we as Rasta women, we should define ourselves. We shouldn't be letting Rasta men define and tell us who Rasta woman is. We should be saying who Rasta women were. And that was in the early 90s, you know, she was saying that well before her time, you know. The significance of the film, we needed it. We needed a voice to see that we weren't stuck in kitchens just baby making, as the media of the day wanted to portray us as. If not that, then we were pot smoking, ganja smoking all the time. They just had different labels for us. So Elmina, you know, we got to call her Elmina because that was her middle name, and she discovered Elmina Castle. So, you know, Sister D went out the window and it was Elmina. But yeah, Elmina was very kind of focused on making sure that, you know, the Rasta woman had that platform to show and say who she is herself with her own words. So yeah, brilliant.
Excellent. And June, I know you wasn't featured in the film, but I know you are also familiar with the Sister D's work and also Sister D. What would you say was the significance of the film at this time? Oh, I think you need to unmute.
Unmute. You need to unmute, June.
Can we unmute June?
I've done it.
Okay, there we go.
Hi. Sorry, everyone. And thanks again for inviting me as well, Aleema, to be on this. Especially as Sister D and her film are, are in the archive. And she's somebody I knew in different contexts. As a curator, we showed the film in Martinique and at the Image Carib Film Festival. And of course, there are Rastafarian women all over the world, and they really come out and love to see the film. It's a very special film because there had never been, and for instance, the Image Carib Film Festival ran from 88 to 92. So towards the end of that time, they could see it. And Sister D was also on the African continent at the Fespago Film Festival, where it was shown. Sorry, I turned it off. Yeah, she was, Sister D was hungry to learn, and she was had a determined belief that she could actually use the medium of film and use it well in the service of many of those whose voices are often muffled, distorted, or altogether missing in significant ways in this society. And that particularly was very, very important at the sort of time that she was able to play that role. And I mean, the film itself is still significant now because most people, a lot of people are still discovering it. And as I say, it was important internationally because not many people had the opportunity to present themselves. And in those societies, whether you were in France or Holland or everywhere, it was the same. There was a lot of misrepresentation of who Rastafarian women were. And so they were very glad to have something that would present who they were in such an honored way, and in such a way that actually spoke truth to power about this important dimension of who we were, of who Rastafarian women were. So that was really important. But what she managed to do with her work in this direction was to show that with a determination to present and to serve her community through film, it would be something that would allow her to move forward and to to be able to demonstrate as well that if you have a passion in that particular area and you know what your agenda is, you'd be able to present it well using the medium. I think it's a fantastic film because her use of archive is incredible in the film. And I don't just mean the historic archive. The contemporary archive that she uses is really, really important. And of course, the film itself becomes an archive because it presents in so many ways what was happening both in the Caribbean, but what was happening here also, and what that meant for people's lives in this country. Yeah. So.
I agree. I think for me, as I said, watching Elmina's film was almost like looking into my soul in a strange way, and watching the film even before understanding her work and understanding who the filmmaker was. I felt like it was very much a personal archive. And I think what I love the most about Elmina's work and the film is that there isn't no, I guess all of the women presented in the film are situated on a horizontal platform, you know, there isn't any idea of the ideal woman, the ideal Rasta woman, or what does it mean to be a Rasta woman. But all of these women are presented in their own environment with their own sense of, you know, liberty, as I was saying in my presentation. And for me, I feel like, you know, that's so important, that's so important in capturing that essence of just being yourself, essentially. So yeah, Upful works when it comes to, yeah, thinking about the significance of the film. But Rashida, as someone who was obviously featured in the film, but also not even just featured, but one of the main reasons why, you know, or maybe that for me, the main featured reason was, you know, your work on the Wadada magazine. Could you talk a little bit about what the Wadada magazine, to let the people them know, but also what for you, I guess, did Rastafari offer you as a Black woman in Britain?
Okay, Wadada magazine was like the concept actually of Russ, you know, he's my children's father, and yeah, he had the brilliant idea that, you know, you write so much, you know, you're always writing. He knew I had a love for writing, and I'd done diplomas in journalism, so, you know, he said we should start a Rasta magazine, and he was the one that named it, actually, Wadada Educational Magazine. And that magazine, Aleema, was done on a typewriter. We typed out each page. The first one was like about 18 pages, and then we collated them with, you know, a kind of plastic kind of cover, and it was always pictures of His Majesty, you know, for every volume. And I think we did about 12 or 13 volumes over the years. It was supposed to be monthly, but of course, at that time, we just didn't have the knowledge of advertising and getting ads and, you know, things like that to make it all work. We just wanted the information out there. And it was, you know, a magazine that was filled with what people sent in to us also. So from there, it was different aspects. So it was never one point of view. It came from different aspects, but the central point was His Imperial Majesty. I mean, that to me, you know, it was, in terms of today, looking back, in terms of today, yes, it's quite primitive, you know, in terms of what desktop publishing can do, but it started out and it gave us the premise of knowing that, you know, we could then put our own stories forward, because at the time we were under attack by the press. You know, everything was all so negative about Rastafari, and they didn't understand us. They didn't really want to understand us. And that also, you know, transcended to our own communities. There was people in our own community that, it's all a stupidness, what an Rasta this and an Rasta that. So, you know, we weren't being actually taken serious. So I think I answered your question there.
Yes, you did. So in many ways, well, not the second part of the question, but I just wanted to follow up on what you were saying. So in many ways, it kind of goes back to the kind of significance of archival activity in kind of owning that voice, I guess, with the Wadada Educational Magazine, as a kind of creating those counter narratives, would you say?
Oh, definitely, definitely. And, you know, at the time, remember, we're young, so we don't really understand what we're doing. We just know that we've got to, and this was before I did my degree in journalism. So I was just going by instinct. So all we knew was that, you know, we had to tell our own story. And until we did, the lion is always going to be the hero. Because, you know, Rastafari opened up for me knowledge of myself as a woman. You know, you mean my ancestors were queen? I didn't want to know about the slavery part, and I'd seen Roots, and that was enough. I didn't need to see another film about slavery after that. I was more interested in, you know, we're kings and queens, the Candaces and the Hatshepsut and the Nzingas. And, you know, those were the women that got me fired up. And, you know, I swear their blood runs through me because I could feel their stories, you know, and I too wanted to make a difference in whatever way I could as a Rasta woman, but not to be defined by anyone, but, you know, by myself, like Sister D would say. So, yeah.
We have a question from someone, and they said, can Rashida or June tell us Amiga Rising's film exhibition history in the UK? Perhaps June actually might be able to speak more to that. Where in the cinemas and or community centres? And does Rashida remember the discussions with women audiences and the community when the film was screened? So the last part of that, I think you kind of touched upon that, Rashida, in talking about the response and I guess some of the challenges, which is something that I always struggle to talk about when it comes to looking at Rastafari. I think I'm still trying to find a way. How do we talk about, Rastafari, gendered identity in a way that can center liberation, I guess. I always struggle to kind of, talk about some of those, I guess, the challenges with being a Rastafari woman, because there's so many negatives out there, you know. So I guess, what was the, you mentioned some of the challenges and that Sister D had doing this film, but I guess as well, how was it received? So I guess that's open to both of you.
Okay, well, what I will say is that I remember attending the launch of Amiga Rising, Women of Rastafari, at the Rio Cinema in Brixton. And was it Brixton or was it Dalston? You see, I'm the head not so young again. Anyway, I remember going to the launch, and she got a standing ovation at the end of it. She received a standing ovation. Everyone that attended, press and public, stood up. And when they realized that the director was in the house, she received a standing ovation. The negativity, I think, came after that, because within Rastafari, I think at that time, there's always been some kind of power struggle where, even between the organizations. So that led to the majority of Rassis were not kind of belonging to any organizations. You had EWF, you had the 12 Tribes of Israel, you had the Imperial World Federation. They all splintered later on down the road. But it was, just actually thinking about it, it was a time of confusion as well at times. So we really, really needed Amiga Rising, to work. The discussions that it brought was good for women, we didn't all agree, because I remember going to Birmingham where it was shown, and there was, discussions there and disagreements there. But what it did, it opened a discourse for us among ourselves to discuss it. And that was important. Yeah.
I wonder if June can.
Well, of course, there were a lot of screenings within the community screenings and cultural events, but there were also screenings at, of the film within the film venues, and especially within the context of the film workshop work. This is the film that Sister D is most known for, and the platform that she's most known for. But her work also included or involved, she was involved in a lot of the other work that was done by the Cheddar Film Collective, Film Workshop. And she played a significant role in presenting, or at least gathering, those stories. And so a lot of the places that would show it, I mean, I can think, of course, the West London ones, but also Yar Santiwa, and also some of those in other parts of London. But it was also shown within the context of Black film screenings that were organized by the workshops and also by some of the cultural and film institutions, such as the BFI over the years. But it was most appreciated and loved within the community, as Rashida has said. And in fact, I'd shown it, or I'd shown part of it as well, in an exhibition about archives and about the archives that we showed at the Royal Society of Arts as part of a development project around arts and culture called Underground Railroad, that was organized by Gayleen Gould, and it involved a number of artists. And I was presenting this idea of what an archive can be and what it is. And Sister D's film, Omega Rising, was part of that. And it really attracted a lot of attention because people, they had heard about it or they hadn't seen it. And discovering it, the discovery of it, I think was quite special for people. And as Rashida said, I think like archives generally, there's always contestation about meaning and value and so. But I think that the discussions were always very useful in terms of giving people an opportunity to explore and to challenge things that they didn't understand, and that the film actually brought out for people to reflect on. I think there was a lot of reflection that took place. There was some contention, but a lot of people reflected on what they thought they knew Rastafari was. And a lot of people didn't know much about Rastafarian women. They see women with locks, and they see women with their head tied, and they hear something of what they think it is, but they didn't know. And, you know, the presentation of that range of women who identify as Rastafari in the film, and the fact that it covers such a long history. In the film, Rastafarian women are shown and are witnessed from the 1930s in Jamaica. And I think when you present that sort of history, or you put the subject and the movement in that sort of history, people get a slightly different understanding. And also when she talks about who some of the commentators or supporters and so were of it, she mentions people like Walter Rodney. I'm Guyanese, so it's good to hear that Walter Rodney, but he was, and I understand why he was, because he studied at UWI during you know, quite a crucial time, and he is a revolutionary, and he would have supported the whole Rastafarian movement. Wasn't necessarily a Rasta himself, but then, I mean, you can't really say it, because a lot of people are Rastafarian from a deeper level, even if they don't have the external expression. And so, yeah, so I thought the opportunity to present it in such a deep way offered, it was a way in for a lot of people to understand and to feel something different about what Rastafarian women, who Rastafarian women were, and what Rastafari was itself, beyond the fashion or the, you know, the accoutrements that usually attach.
Right. And I think as well, you touched upon it, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit more on that, as this event is talking about archival resistance. I'm very kind of fluid in my definitions or in my thinking. I think my thinking around the archive is more about not necessarily finding the answers, but a new set of questions to think about archival activity. And would you say the role of the work that you're doing, how far would you describe it as, I guess, activism? How far would you do you see the role and the work of your doing, particularly I'm thinking with the June Giovanni Pan-African Film Archive, I always get the title wrong.
A mouthful, you can call it JG Packer, Pan-African Film Archive.
Particularly with that work, would you describe that as, would you situate that within an activist framework or not?
It's funny, somebody had that as my title or my introduction one time, and I sort of challenged it, but other people call me an activist because they know what I do and they see that as part of activism. But it's true that my approach and my intention for becoming involved in Pan-African cinema, in screening films, in films generally, in the film world generally, did come from a passion or an understanding, or what I felt was an important activity that needed to happen around representations, because people are continually not valuing, and they don't know who we are, they don't know what we do, and that's why they're not, they don't know the history. We don't, a lot of us don't know our own history. And there's so much to know beyond, as Rashida said, slavery. And of course, histories that challenge are so important for the young people growing up in this country, growing up in across the diaspora, that they know themselves and they know the histories that are behind them. Pan-African cinema, yes, because I also think it's important, the connection between the African continent and who we are as Black people throughout the world and the African diaspora. So I suppose activist in that sense, and I believe it's a connection that is often made, but so many dimensions to that connection are often missed. And that's why it's one of the reasons I also like to maybe sometimes work with timelines, because I believe you can actually make connections and look at, and this is also what archives are used for, looking at what you're discovering from one area and how it relates to another area and another time. And that's quite important in terms of the value of archives, but it's also important in how you situate a look at the cultures that are the ones that are behind who we are as Black people in this world, and how it can be presented to the next generations, and the stories that actually connect between them.
I think definitely, I think it offers us a way to be in this constant, and shows us, so I guess, that we're in constant dialogue with the past. I'm conscious that we have some questions as well. I'm just looking at them. Feel free to continue asking questions, even though I'm not reading them. Catherine says, how important do you think was her work in terms of inspiring other women to make films? And I guess I'll extend on these questions to think, particularly think about Rashida. How important was this film also just inspiring women in general to take more of a, not even more of an active role, to, I guess, to put themselves up front in the same way that Elmina did. So yeah, the question basically says, how important do you think was her work in terms of inspiring other women to make films?
Yeah, vital. I mean, Elmina was a trailblazer. You know, she took her camera on her back and she got on a plane and she went to Africa. And I remember some of the first pictures, because she would take lots of pictures as well, she sent me was from Ghana, and with like lots of different people. And at the bottom, at the back of the card, the photo, she'd just written, "You need to be here," you know. um, yeah, she was making a difference as a filmmaker, as a Rastafari woman filmmaker. She empowered and inspired me. You know, at the time, yes, I was running Candice magazine, but she gave me, you know, a kind of a signpost to come to Africa. And I went to Africa first time with Elmina to Ghana in 94, went to Ghana and Gambia that time. So I've seen, you know, with my own eyes, the inspiration that she gave to women. And again, you know, I will always come back to this and say that it was also very sad that some women didn't appreciate, you know, Sister D's work, to the fact that when I said we needed to do a Amiga Rising Part 2, I always remember she said, you know, "I'm going to leave that to you guys because they gave me hell," you know, and it was just so sad the way she said it. They gave me hell. I just couldn't understand. But, you know, as you grow, you get to understand human beings, and yeah, they're different, you know, little quirks about them. But yeah, I think Rasta women who knows about Sister D, Elmina's work, you know, hold her in high esteem. They really do. And even when I went to Jamaica, the women who she interviewed out there, you know, Sister Minnie, she's gone now, bless her soul, but she always remembered Sister D and that pioneering spirit, as she called it, of, you know, that tiny woman, you know, because yeah, she likaba, she talawa. Yeah.
Yeah. She I mean, she did so much. And I mean, the thing is, Sister D was working with a video camera, and I mean, at Jeddah, she was working with the collective, but her concern was for the community and giving voice to the community. And because she was somebody that connected so easily with people, she could go wherever. So when things were happening, very important, very significant things were happening, such as on Broadwater Farm, she could go with her camera on her shoulder and everybody would speak to her. They would trust her and would speak to her. She could, they know that she would be able to present the counter narrative. And that was so significant. And it was something that she had a sort of a fearlessness and also a determination, because she would be the one that would actually be present and to ask the questions that needed to be asked. So she was working on a lot of those films and actually brought that connection with the community as well. And she would join forces and was hungry to sort of practice her craft. And I think other people could recognize that. So she could participate with other independent filmmakers. For instance, she worked with Amani Naftali in the production of his film, Bohemian Noir et la Renaissance de l'Afrique. I think she did sound or assistant camera on that. I think it was Ian Watts that shot that, but she was working with others who very much regarded both her talent and her determination to do something important around Rastafari. So it's not surprising that she worked with Menelik, whose name, of course, comes up in the film. That she worked with Menelik and Imru Bakari, who produced her film Mega Rising. But these were people that had a lot of respect for her. They could see her determination and were keen for her to, you know, to actually gain the skills that she wanted to have. Yeah, and I saw her also on the African continent. She was there moving around Burkina Faso during the festival as somebody that was actually connecting with the women there very much. She was a sister in all of those contexts and on all of those platforms, and very highly regarded in those contexts.
On the subject
I should just say as well, she worked in Ghana with Nikwate Wu, the Ghanaian filmmaker whose work we presented last year, a series of webinars. He was based in London at the time when he made the film You Hide Me. But he was making, the thing is, Sister D was in Burkina Faso for the film festival, and Stevie Wonder was one of the people who was there at the time and was going to Ghana to set up a project. And Nikwate Wu was also working on that project. And Sister D was working with him for some time when he was when they were in Ghana. And he spoke very, very, very highly, has some photographs as well of her at that time, of her time in Ghana around film.
On the subject of archives, I'm just looking at the questions here. I actually have a question. Someone's saying, can Aleema tell us more about her research in the archives? What unexpected turns and encounters did she experience? Where and how did she start? That's a really good question. I'll keep it very brief. I started in the community, specifically because for people who look like me, as I was saying, we come to a point where we cannot really trust history. And when I say history, I'm saying history with a capital H. So for me, I knew it was very, very important to start in the community, speaking with the elders, speaking with people like Rashida, and anybody who knows anything about Rasta knows that Rastafari is almost like there's no house that you go in that you don't see newspaper cutouts or images of His Majesty or some kind of document that's like, no, this is preserving, we're preserving this, even when I spoke to Sister D's son for my research, as obviously I couldn't contact Sister D, he came out with all of these documents, these rich, vibrant documents. And so every home that I've entered that Rastafari, allowed me to enter, opened me up to this whole body of archives, of community archives. And for me, that was my starting point in thinking about, when we look at state archives or the National Archive, which I did visit, but I was like, within these institutions, there's so many hierarchies of knowledge embedded in that. And for me, it was important to start from the outside. And then looking from the outside, I could look inward and understand these archives with a different, as I was saying earlier, with not necessarily looking for the answers, but more kind of questions around these activities. So I would say that was my archival approach. One of the things that I found that I didn't expect to find was, perhaps with regret, the importance of Britain as a space. As much as my research is titled Bon Babylon, trying to engage with like the space of Britain, but I actually realized that there was this strong entanglement between Britain, the Caribbean, and even when you look at even the film collectives and the emergence of film collectives, but even further back from that, when you look at the rise of Pan-Africanism, looking at Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia and His Majesty living in Bath, Fairfield House, there is this rich kind of entanglement of Britain as the space. One of the things that I found is that a lot of people in Jamaica during the Windrush was actually coming to Britain, not in this kind of colonial idea of like saving the mother country, but because it was the same year that His Majesty Haile Selassie announced the land grant in Shashamane. So many people are actually traveling to England with the intention of going to Mama Africa, to Shashamane. So loads of those nuances kind of came out in my research, but yeah, essentially my approach is very much looking from the outside and looking how we can start centering more community archives, etc., etc. we have another question here, and I've also got we're also coming towards the end of the event, but we've got another question. What do the panel think of contemporary representations in the media of the Rastafari community today? We're thinking about, I guess, some of Sister D's legacies today. So more of a kind of legacy question, and thinking about the contemporary representations today. Rashida.
Okay, let me put that up. Contemporary representation of Rasta women today.
Or just,
okay.
I think the question says Rastafari, so I guess it's not just women, but also just in general.
Rastafari.
Yeah.
Well, the youngsters, you youngsters have taken the pattern now, haven't you? So I think it very much is to just keep an eye on that progression, that development, that evolve. I think, it's evolved. Rastafari has evolved, and it's evolved through people like Sister D, who came with a groundbreaking film on Rasta women to show the different aspect of Rasta women, that no, we were not just baby making machinery stuck at home, but yeah, we were doing, we were always doing stuff, it's just that the media just concentrated on one aspect of us. So, it's, you always get me with stuff, Aleema, you always get me with stuff.
I would say, yeah, I would say as well, I think it's a difficult question, because I think Rastafari went through this kind of upswell moment in the 70s and the 80s. And for many, when you talk about Rastafari today, it's almost like, I feel like in many ways the ideas, Rastafari lives on in a lot of the ideas. And I think one of the things that Rastafari has offered Britain and the Black radical tradition is this kind of like, this never-ending process of bunning Babylon and being this critical thread in society of constantly questioning, critiquing, whether it's your hair, your diet, ital food, whether it's the language that you talk.
Yes.
There's this deeply rooted criticalness within Rastafari traditions that I think is still bubbling in a lot of the conversations that you have today about decolonizing, for instance.
Yes. And also, I love the way the youth think in terms of, had we, and even before me, because I'm not that old, really. Had we and those before us done certain things, we would be in a stronger economical position also, in terms of, we should have really and truly trademarked ITAL, because now then bring it and call it veganism. You understand? So there's a lot of things that, and it's the youth them start pointing these things out, because the youth, I think what they're doing is like we did, we took the best from our parents and brought that forward. And I think that's what the youths have done with Rastafari. They've taken, and I have had a lot of cussing from youths about our generation, that we set nothing up. There was no foundation. There's so much of that going on. But what I think that they've proved is that, well, some of them are strong enough to go ahead, like yourself, Aleema. You're a Rasta woman that many Rasta sisters will now look up to. You're savvy, you're contemporary, you're intelligent, and you're cultural, so those things are going to hold up, and we will evolve, and we will be, those great empress that we always have been. Yes.
They can't say that really, because, Black women heard, there's this Sonia Boyce picture, Some English Rose, and she's holding up the whole family, because at the time of struggle, Black struggle in this country, women, Rastafarian women, all women, Black women had a particularly important role, not only within the struggle generally, but in holding the family together and in supporting a nurturing role for the children in face of expectations, for instance, of Black children within the school system and within society. Those things might have changed shape, but they're still important and they're still there. And, a system, having to do battles to ensure that they come through the system, all of those things are still happening, and they're still being required here. it's institutions such as the Saturday schools, that you're both young Black men and Black women would be the ones providing the knowledge and the cultural support for the young ones in the society. Those were, and a lot of those things are still needed, whether we have the same structures for them or whether people do them as a collective group is something else, because at that time they were very much organized collectively. Now they tend to be less collective operation, I believe, of that sort of role. And a lot of the structures that were built then, were set up then, are no longer in place. So a lot of people that are looking back and say nothing was done, they're the ones that have actually benefited from it. And it's now that we're in a different time. So those things will take a different shape. And yes, maybe what we do need are archival activists. Coming back to that question, what we do need are archival activists. What we do need is good access to that history, so people will build on that history rather than sort of say, well, we haven't got anything and I need to start it. And I find that a lot with a lot of young people. They're not actually looking carefully at what there is or what there has been and seeing how they can build on it. Because if each generation comes along and has to start from scratch, we're going to be losing a lot of energy throughout the generations. It's important to build on what there is and take it to the next level. And that's what, Sankofa was all about.
Exactly. I was gonna just end on that kind of point of, we need more archival activists, but we also need more access, more critical engagement, continuing the documenting, the writing, and I guess showing that history is very much a doing. It's an active process of engaging. But so the work still continues, the struggle goes on, the journey continues. But with 5 minutes past the time, so I'm gonna end it here. I don't know how the time went so quickly, but just want to give thanks for sharing the space with me. Thank you to the ICO and all of the supporters and all of the participants tuning in this evening. Lots more to say, but I think I really enjoyed the discussion, and hope to keep talking and keep doing, essentially. But yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing it.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us. Thank you.